Elena Gromov was a woman everyone considered successful. At 45, she owned one of the largest construction companies in the city, traveled the world in business class, and lived in a luxurious mansion. Yet behind her elegant appearance hid a lonely heart. Since losing her husband 5 years earlier, she had buried herself in work. They had never been able to have children, and the silence waiting for her every evening had become unbearable. That chilly autumn morning, Elena was rushing to the airport. A crucial business trip awaited her overseas. The negotiations could secure a contract worth millions, and she couldn't afford to be late. As she hurried past a bus stop, something made her slow down. A young woman sat on the cold bench, holding a baby tightly against her chest. Despite her worn-out coat and exhausted face, she was remarkably beautiful. The little boy, wrapped in a thin blanket, shivered quietly in her arms. Elena hesitated. "How long have you been here?" she asked. The young woman looked up, surprised. 3 days, she answered softly. "We have nowhere else to go." "What about your family?" "My mother passed away 2 years ago. I never knew my father. The baby's father threw us out after my son was born." There was no bitterness in her voice, only exhaustion. "What is your name?" "Maria." "And your little one?" "Artyom." Elena glanced at her watch. Her driver was already waiting, and the airport was nearly an hour away. Without another word, she reached into her handbag and took out a small ring of keys. "I own a country house about an hour from here," she said. "It's empty, warm, and stocked with food. I'm leaving for a business trip that should last 3 months. Stay there until I return." Maria stared at her in disbelief. You don't even know me." "No," Elena replied with a faint smile. "But I know what it feels like to lose everything." Tears filled Maria's eyes. "I don't know how to thank you. Take care of the house. More importantly, take care of your son." She wrote the address on a business card, placed the keys into Maria's trembling hand, and turned toward her waiting car. Within minutes, Elena was on her way to the airport, convinced she had simply done one good deed before leaving the country. She had no idea that the trip would last twice as long as planned. Or that 6 months later, when she finally returned to her country house, the sight waiting behind its gates would leave her completely speechless. 3 months passed faster than Elena had expected. The negotiations were successful, but just days before her return flight, a major investor withdrew from the project. What should have been a quick business trip turned into endless meetings, legal disputes, and emergency negotiations across 3 countries. She called the caretaker of her city home regularly but never mentioned the country house. Somehow, amid the pressure of saving her company, she completely forgot about Maria and her baby. By the time everything was settled, 6 months had gone by. The moment Elena landed back home, exhaustion overwhelmed her. Her assistant insisted she take a few days off, but one thought suddenly crossed her mind. The country house. "I'll drive there myself," she said. Late that afternoon, her black SUV rolled down the familiar country road lined with golden autumn trees. She expected to find an empty house, perhaps a few signs that someone had lived there for a while. Instead, she stopped in complete disbelief. The neglected garden she remembered had been transformed into a breathtaking paradise. Colorful flowers surrounded the porch. Fresh vegetables grew in perfectly organized beds. Fruit trees had been carefully trimmed, and even the old wooden fence had been repaired. "This can't be," she whispered. She stepped out of the car and slowly walked toward the house. The porch had been repainted. The windows sparkled in the sunlight. A handmade wooden swing hung beneath the old oak tree, a swing she had never seen before. Children's laughter echoed from the backyard. Elena froze. She quietly walked around the corner and saw little Artyom, now walking confidently on his own, chasing a playful puppy across the grass. Nearby stood Maria, hanging freshly washed clothes on a line. She looked healthier, stronger, and happier than the frightened young woman Elena had met 6 months earlier. At that exact moment, Maria noticed the black SUV. The clothespin slipped from her fingers. Their eyes met. For a long second, neither of them spoke. Then Maria hurried toward Elena, tears already filling her eyes. "I've been waiting for you every single day," she whispered. Elena looked around once more. Nothing had been stolen. Nothing had been damaged. Instead, someone had filled the lonely property with warmth, laughter, and life. But what Maria said next made Elena's heart skip a beat. "There's something you need to see inside the house, something I could never explain over the phone." Maria opened the front door with trembling hands. "I've kept everything exactly as it was," she said quietly. "But there's one room I had to enter." Elena frowned. "What room?" "The attic." She stopped. "I know I shouldn't have, but the roof was leaking during a storm. I went upstairs to stop the water, and I found something." Curious, Elena followed Maria through the familiar hallway. The house looked cleaner than it had in years. Every piece of furniture shone. Fresh flowers decorated the dining table, and the scent of homemade bread filled the air. Then Maria led her to the attic. A large wooden chest stood against the wall. "I found it behind old boxes," Maria explained. It was locked, but the lock had rusted away. Elena slowly lifted the lid. Inside were dozens of photographs. She picked up the first one and gasped. It showed her as a little girl, smiling beside her parents in front of this very house. Another photo showed her late husband planting the apple trees that now filled the garden. There were birthday cards, letters, children's drawings, and even a tiny pair of knitted baby shoes. Elena's hands began to shake. "We bought those," she whispered. Maria looked at her with concern. "For your child?" Elena nodded. "We were expecting a baby. I decorated a nursery, bought clothes, toys. Then I lost the pregnancy." She had never told anyone how deeply that loss had broken her. Afterward, she had closed the nursery, locked away every memory in the attic, and never returned. Tears rolled silently down her cheeks. "I buried my entire life up here." Maria gently handed her another envelope. "I think this belongs to you." Inside was an unfinished letter written by Elena's husband shortly before his fatal accident. "My dearest Elena. If you're reading this, it means I never got the chance to say these words. Please don't let grief become your whole life. One day, someone will need your kindness far more than your success. When that day comes, open your heart again. I promise, love always finds its way home." Elena covered her mouth as she finished reading. She remembered the letter now. It had disappeared years ago, and she had believed it was lost forever. Maria gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "I think that's exactly what happened." Elena looked downstairs through the attic window. Little Artyom was laughing in the garden, chasing the puppy beneath the apple trees her husband had planted. For the first time in years, the house no longer felt empty. It felt alive. And deep inside, Elena realized something astonishing. She hadn't rescued Maria and her son. Perhaps, they had rescued her. That evening, Elena asked Maria and Artyom to stay for dinner. It was the first time in years that laughter echoed through the dining room. Artyom proudly carried his tiny wooden spoon, insisting on feeding everyone himself. Even Elena found herself laughing, a sound she barely recognized. After Artyom had fallen asleep, the two women sat on the porch with cups of hot tea. "There is something I never told you," Maria began. "When I arrived here, I planned to stay only a few weeks. But then I noticed how abandoned everything was. The garden was dying. The roof leaked. The paint was peeling away." She smiled softly. "I couldn't just watch it fall apart." Elena looked across the yard. "You brought it back to life." Maria shook her head. "No. I think it brought me back to life." For a long moment, neither woman spoke. Finally, Elena broke the silence. "What will you do now?" Maria lowered her eyes. I don't know. I have no home. No job. No one is waiting for me. Elena looked toward the old apple trees. Her husband's words echoed in her mind. One day, someone will need your kindness more than your success. She took a deep breath. I have an offer. Maria looked up. My company owns several office buildings. We need someone to help manage one of our community projects. It includes a salary, training, and an apartment. Maria's eyes widened. You would trust me with that? I trusted you with my home. A tear rolled down Maria's cheek. I'll never be able to repay you. Elena smiled. Then don't. At that moment, little Artyom wandered sleepily onto the porch, carrying his favorite stuffed rabbit. He climbed onto Elena's lap as if it were the most natural thing in the world. For a second, Elena froze. Then she gently wrapped her arms around him. The little boy rested his head against her shoulder and whispered. Good night. Grandma. Maria's face turned pale. I'm so sorry. He doesn't understand. But Elena quietly shook her head. No. A single tear slipped down her face as she hugged the sleepy child. It's been a very long time since anyone called this house home. For the first time since losing her family, Elena no longer felt like a lonely businesswoman returning to an empty estate. She felt like a woman who had unexpectedly been given a second chance, not to rebuild her company, but to rebuild her heart. Neither of them realized that the greatest challenge was still ahead. The next morning, a black luxury car would stop outside the gate, and the man stepping out would change all of their lives forever. The next morning, the peaceful silence of the country house was broken by the sound of tires crunching on gravel. A sleek black luxury sedan stopped outside the gate. Maria looked through the kitchen window, and the color drained from her face. It can't be. Elena noticed her trembling hands. Who is it? Maria whispered only one name. Victor. A tall, well-dressed man stepped out of the car, wearing an expensive suit and dark sunglasses. He walked confidently toward the house as if he owned it. Artyom, playing with the puppy in the yard, looked up curiously. The moment Victor saw the little boy, his expression softened for only a second before returning to its usual coldness. So, he said, removing his sunglasses, this is where you've been hiding. Maria instinctively stood in front of her son. We're leaving. You don't have to worry. Victor laughed. I didn't come because of you. His eyes shifted to Elena. You must be Ms. Gromov. I am. He offered his hand, but Elena ignored it. I've heard a lot about you, he continued. You're a remarkable businesswoman. What do you want? Victor smiled politely. I came for my son. Maria gasped. You gave up that right the day you threw us out. Victor's smile disappeared. I've changed. No, Maria replied firmly. You've become richer. An uncomfortable silence filled the yard. Finally, Victor sighed. My company is expanding overseas. My lawyers advised me that having an heir is important. Elena stared at him in disbelief. So you abandoned your child when he was helpless, and now you want him because it benefits your business? Victor didn't answer. That silence was answer enough. Little Artyom slowly walked toward Elena and took her hand. He had no idea what the adults were arguing about. He only knew who made him feel safe. Victor noticed. I can offer him the best schools, the best doctors, anything money can buy. Elena looked him straight in the eye. And where were all those things when he had no food? Victor's jaw tightened. I made mistakes. No, Elena replied calmly. Mistakes happen once. What you did was a choice. For the first time in years, someone had spoken to Victor without fear. He realized money could not buy respect. Nor could it erase the past. As he turned to leave, he paused. This isn't over, he said quietly. My lawyers will contact you. The car disappeared down the country road, leaving behind an uneasy silence. Maria collapsed onto the porch, shaking. "I've been afraid of this day ever since he found us." Elena placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You won't face him alone." Neither woman realized that Victor's return had nothing to do with fatherhood. He was hiding a dangerous secret. One that could destroy his entire business empire if it ever came to light. Victor's threat lingered in everyone's mind for days. Maria barely slept. Every time a car passed the house, she feared it had come to take Artyom away. Elena, however, refused to give in to fear. "If Victor wants a legal battle," she said, "then we'll find out what he's really hiding." The next morning, Elena called her oldest friend, Daniel Brooks, a respected attorney who had spent more than 20 years investigating corporate fraud. After listening carefully, Daniel asked only one question. Did Victor suddenly become interested in his son after years of complete silence? Yes. Then the child isn't the reason. He's the excuse. Within a week, Daniel uncovered something astonishing. Victor's company was under investigation for laundering millions of dollars through fake charities and shell corporations. The investigation was still confidential, but several executives had already agreed to cooperate with federal authorities. "There is more," Daniel said during a private meeting. "If Victor is convicted, most of his assets could be frozen." Elena frowned. "What does that have to do with Artyom?" Daniel slid a document across the table. Victor had recently rewritten his will. If anything happened to him, his entire remaining fortune would legally pass to his only biological child. "He doesn't want to be a father," Elena whispered. "He wants to protect his money." Daniel nodded. "If the authorities freeze his estate, a child beneficiary could complicate the legal process. His lawyers are buying time." Maria felt sick. "So, Artyom is just another business asset." "I'm afraid so." Silence filled the room. Then Daniel smiled for the first time. Fortunately, Victor made one mistake. He produced another file. 6 years earlier, Victor had signed a notarized statement permanently surrendering all parental responsibilities in exchange for avoiding child support claims. Maria stared at the document. "I thought it had been destroyed." "It wasn't." Daniel leaned back. "If this document is authentic, and it appears to be, Victor's custody case is almost impossible to win." For the first time in weeks, Maria allowed herself to breathe. That evening, she watched Artyom asleep in his bed while Elena stood quietly at the doorway. "I've spent my whole life building companies," Elena said softly. "But this little boy." She smiled. "He's worth fighting for." Outside, rain began to fall. Neither of them noticed the figure watching the house from the darkness beyond the gate. Victor had not come alone this time. Someone far more dangerous had entered the game. At exactly 2 o'clock in the morning, the old security alarm chimed softly. Elena opened her eyes. Someone was outside. She quietly looked through the bedroom window. A hooded figure stood near the garden fence, shining a flashlight toward the house. Before she could react, the person slipped through the gate. Elena immediately called the police but knew they would take time to arrive. She carefully walked downstairs. The house was silent. Maria and Artyom were still asleep. Then came a gentle knock. Not on the front door. On the kitchen window. Elena slowly approached. Outside stood an elderly man with silver hair and tired eyes. He raised both hands to show he meant no harm. "Please," he whispered. "Don't call out. I'm here to help." Elena opened the window only a few inches. "Who are you?" "My name is Samuel Reed. I worked as Victor's chief accountant for 15 years. Elena's expression hardened. "Why should I believe anything you say?" "Because Victor is not the most dangerous man involved." Samuel pulled a thick envelope from inside his coat. "I've spent months collecting evidence." Inside were bank statements, photographs, secret contracts, and copies of financial records linking Victor to an international money laundering network. If these documents reach the authorities, Samuel said, dozens of powerful people will go to prison. Why bring them to me? Because Victor knows I took them. Samuel looked over his shoulder nervously. They're hunting me. Suddenly, bright headlights swept across the driveway. Another black SUV stopped outside the gate. Samuel's face turned white. They found me. Without hesitation, Elena unlocked the back door. Come inside. Samuel shook his head. If they see me enter, they'll search the house. He handed her the envelope. Hide this. Before Elena could answer, Samuel disappeared into the darkness behind the trees. Moments later, two men climbed out of the SUV. They weren't wearing business suits. They wore black tactical jackets and spoke quietly into earpieces. One of them pointed directly toward the house. From the upstairs window, Maria watched in terror. They're coming. Elena quickly hid the envelope beneath a loose floorboard in the old pantry. A loud knock echoed through the house. Then another. Finally, a deep voice called from outside. Open the door. We know you're hiding something. For the first time since this nightmare began, Elena realized they were no longer fighting a custody battle. They were standing in the middle of a criminal conspiracy that reached far beyond Victor, and someone was willing to kill to keep the truth buried. The pounding on the front door grew louder. Open the door, one of the men shouted. Before Elena could move, the distant sound of police sirens echoed through the countryside. The men outside exchanged nervous glances. They called the police, one muttered. Leave. Now. Within seconds, both men rushed back to their SUV and disappeared into the darkness just as two police vehicles arrived. The officers searched the area but found no sign of the intruders. Inside the house, Elena finally revealed the envelope Samuel had given her. The documents were even more shocking than anyone had imagined. There were signed contracts, hidden bank accounts, secret recordings, and photographs connecting Victor and several influential businessmen to years of financial crimes. Daniel carefully examined every page. This is enough, he said quietly. Enough for what? To bring down an entire criminal organization. The evidence was immediately handed over to federal investigators. For several tense weeks, everyone waited. Then, early one morning, the news broke. Authorities had carried out coordinated raids across the country. Victor and several of his associates were arrested on charges of fraud, money laundering, tax evasion, and conspiracy. Samuel Reed entered the witness protection program after agreeing to testify. The custody lawsuit was dismissed before it ever reached court. Victor would not be seeing freedom for many years. One sunny afternoon, Elena, Maria, and little Artyom sat beneath the blooming apple trees. The nightmare was finally over. Maria looked at Elena with grateful eyes. You saved us. Elena smiled and shook her head. No. She looked at Artyom, who was happily chasing butterflies across the garden. The day I handed you those keys, I thought I was giving you a place to stay. She paused. But you gave me something I thought I had lost forever. A family. Several months later, Elena officially adopted the country house as her permanent home instead of simply a vacation retreat. Maria accepted the position at Elena's foundation, helping single mothers rebuild their lives. Together, they transformed the old estate into a community center where families in need could find temporary shelter, food, and hope. Above the entrance, Elena placed a small wooden sign. One act of kindness can change a lifetime. Every visitor asked why those words meant so much to her. She would simply smile, glance toward the old front gate, and remember the cold autumn morning when she almost walked past a homeless mother holding a baby. Sometimes, the smallest decision changes not just one life, but many. And every time little Artyom ran into her arms calling, Grandma Elena, she knew that the greatest fortune she had ever received had never been money. It had been love. 6 years passed. The old country house had become something far greater than anyone had imagined. What had once been an empty summer home was now the Hope House, a place where homeless mothers and children could find safety, education, and a fresh start. Hundreds of families had walked through its doors, each carrying a painful story, and each leaving with hope. Every visitor knew the story of the first mother who had arrived with nothing but a baby in her arms. Maria was now the director of the foundation. Confident, respected, and compassionate, she dedicated her life to helping women who reminded her of her younger self. Elena, though officially retired from the business world, remained the heart of the organization. Her greatest joy came every afternoon when the children returned from school. Among them was 12-year-old Artyom. He was bright, kind, and endlessly curious. He loved books, dreamed of becoming a lawyer, and often said he wanted to protect people who had no one else to defend them. One autumn evening, as golden leaves drifted across the garden, Artyom walked over to Elena carrying a small wooden box. "I made something for you." Inside was a hand-carved key. Elena smiled. "A key?" Artyom nodded. "You once gave Mom the key to this house." He paused before continuing. "That key opened our future." He gently placed the wooden key into her hands. "So, I made one for you." Tears filled Elena's eyes. "What does this one open?" Artyom smiled. "My heart." Unable to speak, Elena hugged him tightly. Maria watched from the porch, wiping away quiet tears. Years ago, Elena had believed she was giving shelter to strangers. Instead, she had unlocked a family she never expected to find. Later that night, Elena opened the old wooden chest in the attic one last time. She placed Artyom's carved key beside the tiny baby shoes she and her husband had bought so many years ago. The painful memories were no longer symbols of loss. They had become reminders that love sometimes arrives in ways no one could ever predict. Outside, laughter echoed through the garden. Children played beneath the apple trees. Lights glowed warmly from every window of the old house. Elena looked at the life surrounding her and whispered the words her late husband had written years before. "Love always finds its way home." And this time, it truly had. The end.